Marcus was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, but he never complained about it. He had learned long ago that life was not fair, and he could either sit down and feel sorry for himself or stand up and keep moving forward. Marcus chose the second path because he had a little daughter who depended on him completely. She was the reason he woke up every morning, even when his body begged him to stay in bed. She was the reason he smiled, even when his heart was tired. Her name was Lily, and she was only 8 years old, but she was the light that made his dark days brighter. Life as a single father was never easy. Marcus worked at a construction site during the day, and in the evenings he worked part-time at a local grocery store. By the time he reached home, his hands were rough, his back ached, and his eyes burned with exhaustion. Yet, when he saw Lily waiting at the small kitchen table with her homework spread out, all his tiredness disappeared. He would sit with her, help her with math problems, and listen as she told him stories about her school friends. It was those moments that gave him strength to face another long day. The small apartment they lived in was far from luxurious. The paint on the walls had started to peel, the carpet had stains from years of use, and the old heater made noises every night during winter. But Marcus made sure the space felt like a home. There were drawings taped to the refrigerator, most of them made by Lily, showing stick figures of her and her dad holding hands under a bright yellow sun. To Marcus, those pictures were treasures more valuable than gold. Money was always tight. After paying rent and buying groceries, there was rarely anything left. Sometimes he had to choose between paying the electric bill on time or buying new shoes for Lily. He often chose Lily without hesitation, wearing his own old boots until the soles nearly fell apart. People who saw him at work thought he was just another struggling worker, but they didn't know how much sacrifice hid behind his calm smile. There were nights when Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long he could keep up with this life. He wanted to give Lily more than just survival. He wanted her to have the chance to dream big, to chase those dreams without fear of failure. Yet, despite his worries, he never let her see the storms inside his mind. Around her, he was strong, cheerful, and reassuring. She believed her father could fix anything, and Marcus tried his best to live up to that image. One evening, after a long day at work, Marcus came home later than usual. He found Lily asleep on the couch with a book in her hands. He gently lifted her, carried her to her bed, and kissed her forehead. Standing there in the dim light of the small bedroom, Marcus felt a mix of emotions. Pride for the little girl he was raising. Fear of the uncertain future. Hope that tomorrow would somehow be better. Every weekend, Marcus tried to create small adventures for Lily, even though they didn't have money for expensive outings. Sometimes they would walk to the nearby park and feed pigeons. Sometimes they would make popcorn and watch an old movie together. Once in a while, Marcus would surprise her with ice cream, even if it meant skipping his own dinner. Those simple moments mattered more than anything else. They built memories that neither of them would ever forget. Despite his struggles, Marcus had a quiet strength that drew respect from others. His co-workers often noticed how hard he worked, never complaining even when the tasks were heavy. At the grocery store, the manager sometimes tried to convince him to take breaks, but Marcus would just smile and say, "I'll rest when the day is done." People admired his determination, but few knew about the personal battles he fought every single day. Marcus's life had been filled with hardship long before he became a single dad. His relationship with Lily's mother had fallen apart years ago. She had chosen a different path, one that didn't include responsibility, and Marcus was left to raise their daughter on his own. He never spoke badly about her to Lily, though. He wanted his daughter to grow up with love in her heart, not bitterness. Whenever Lily asked questions, Marcus answered gently, focusing on the present rather than the painful past. The loneliness sometimes weighed heavily on him. After putting Lily to bed, he would sit alone at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of cheap coffee and staring at the silence around him. There were moments when he wished for someone to talk to, someone to share his burdens with. But even in those quiet hours, Marcus reminded himself that he had no time to dwell on what he didn't have. His focus had to remain on providing a good life for his daughter. The night was colder than usual. Marcus had just finished his shift at the grocery store and was driving home slowly, his old car making a rattling noise every time it went over a bump. His eyes were heavy from a long day, but the thought of Lily waiting at home kept him awake. She would probably already be in bed, but he still looked forward to seeing her peaceful face. That was the reward he lived for. The streets were quiet, and only a few cars passed by. Marcus turned onto a dimly lit road that cut through the edge of town. He often used this route because it was faster, even though the street lights were sparse. His mind was filled with thoughts of bills, work schedules, and Lily's school trip that was coming up. He was calculating in his head how much money he would need for the fees when something caught his eye. At first, it looked like shadows moving in the distance. But as he drove closer, Marcus realized it was a woman and a small boy running along the sidewalk. The woman's steps were unsteady, and the boy clung to her hand tightly. Behind them, a man was shouting, his voice sharp and angry. Marcus slowed his car, his heart beginning to race. The closer he got, the clearer the scene became. The woman's face looked bruised, her clothes torn. The boy was crying loudly, stumbling as he tried to keep up with his mother. The man behind them was gaining speed, his rage echoing through the night. Marcus's instincts kicked in before his mind even had time to think. He pulled the car over with a screech and jumped out. "Hey! Stop right there," he shouted, his voice strong and filled with urgency. The man froze for a moment, glaring at Marcus, then shouted something back that Marcus couldn't quite hear. The woman looked terrified, her eyes wide and pleading. She held her son close as if shielding him from the danger closing in. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Get in the car," he shouted at the woman, waving them toward his vehicle. The woman hesitated for a split second, then pulled the boy toward the open door. Marcus stood in the way, keeping his body between them and the man who was still yelling angrily. As soon as the woman and child climbed in, Marcus jumped back into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. His heart pounded as he stepped on the gas and sped away. The car roared down the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Marcus checked the rearview mirror and saw the man shrinking into the distance, still waving his fists. The boy was sobbing uncontrollably, and the woman tried to calm him down even though she herself was shaking. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. For a moment, no one spoke. The sound of the engine and the boy's cries filled the silence. Marcus glanced at the woman and said softly, "You're safe now. He can't reach you here." The woman nodded weakly, tears rolling down her cheeks. She pulled her son closer, whispering comforting words to him. Marcus drove for several blocks before slowing down. He turned onto a quieter street and parked under a working streetlight. His chest rose and fell quickly, still filled with adrenaline. He turned toward the woman and asked gently, "Are you hurt? Do you need a hospital?" She shook her head. "No, no hospital," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, just, thank you for helping us." Marcus could see the fear in her eyes. It wasn't just the fear of being hurt, it was the fear of being trapped, the fear of living under constant threat. He looked at the boy, whose face was still wet with tears. He couldn't have been older than 7. Marcus felt his heart ache. He thought of Lily at home, safe in her bed. He thought of how helpless this child must have felt, watching his mother in danger. "You don't have to tell me anything right now," Marcus said softly. "But you're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you while I'm around." The woman nodded again, clutching her son tightly. Her hands were trembling, but Marcus noticed the way she refused to let go of her child. That fierce love reminded him of himself. No matter how hard life was, No parent could bear to see their child suffer. The boy finally quieted down a little, resting his head against his mother's shoulder. Marcus reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old bottle of water he always kept in the car. He handed it to her. "Here, let him have some." She accepted it gratefully and helped the boy drink. For the first time, Marcus saw the boy's tired eyes look up at him with a flicker of trust. It was a small thing, but it touched Marcus deeply. After a few moments, Marcus asked, "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" The woman hesitated, then shook her head slowly. "No. I don't. I have no one. He doesn't let me see anyone. He keeps us away from everyone." Her voice cracked as she spoke. Marcus felt a surge of anger toward the man who had done this to her, but he kept his tone calm. "All right," he said, thinking quickly. "Listen, I don't have much, but I can at least give you a place to rest tonight. My apartment is small, but it's safe." The woman's eyes widened, surprised by his kindness. She opened her mouth to respond but then stopped, tears filling her eyes again. Finally, she whispered, thank you so much." Marcus nodded, started the car again, and headed toward his neighborhood. As he drove, he thought about Lily. He knew it might be confusing for her to see strangers in the house, but he also knew she had a big heart. She would understand. The road seemed longer than usual that night, and Marcus couldn't stop replaying the scene in his mind: the bruised face, the terrified boy, the angry man chasing them. He didn't know who that man was, but something told him this wasn't just a simple fight. It felt darker, more dangerous. Still, Marcus knew he couldn't turn his back on people in need. He couldn't live with himself if he had just driven past. When they finally reached his apartment building, Marcus helped the woman and boy out of the car. He carried the boy's small backpack, which looked half-torn and nearly empty. As they climbed the stairs, Marcus noticed how the woman winced slightly with every step, as if her body ached from more than just running. Inside the apartment, the warmth of the small home greeted them. Lily's drawings on the fridge, the cozy couch, and the faint smell of coffee created a sense of comfort. The boy looked around curiously, his eyes landing on the toys scattered near the couch. Marcus gently guided them to sit down. He offered them food, some bread and soup he had kept from dinner. The woman hesitated, but the boy quickly began eating, his hunger clear. Marcus smiled softly, feeling relief that at least for this moment, they were safe. As the night grew quieter, Marcus sat across from them, still wondering who they were and what story lay behind their fear. He didn't ask too many questions yet, but he knew the answers would come. What mattered right now was that they had escaped danger, and he had been there to help. Deep inside, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was only the beginning of something much bigger. He had no idea how much his life was about to change, but he could sense it. The woman and her child had entered his world suddenly, but he felt an invisible thread connecting them already. And though he was just a struggling single dad, Marcus was ready to protect them as if they were his own. Though life was difficult, Marcus found joy in the smallest things. The sound of Lily's laughter could wash away the fatigue of an entire day. Watching her chase butterflies in the park reminded him of the innocence he was fighting to protect. Listening to her sing softly while drawing pictures filled his heart with warmth. These were the rewards that no amount of money could buy, and they gave Marcus the courage to keep going. People around town began to recognize him not just as a hard-working man, but also as a devoted father. Neighbors often saw him walking hand in hand with Lily, carrying her backpack, or buying her favorite snacks at the corner shop. Some admired his devotion, others pitied his struggles, but Marcus didn't care what anyone thought. His life had one clear purpose: to raise Lily with love, dignity, and hope. And so, day after day, Marcus lived in this balance of struggle and devotion. He didn't know that life was about to test him in ways he never imagined. He didn't know that soon, he would be forced to make choices that could change everything, not just for him and Lily, but for others as well. At that moment, he was simply a tired father, trying to keep his little family together, unaware that fate was quietly preparing to pull him into a story much larger than his own. Marcus sat quietly in his small living room as the woman and her child ate the simple meal he had prepared. The soft clinking of the spoons against the bowls filled the silence, and for the first time that night, there was a little peace in the room. Marcus watched the boy eat hungrily, his small hands gripping the spoon tightly. The woman encouraged him gently, whispering for him to slow down, but Marcus only smiled. He could tell the boy hadn't eaten well in a while. When the meal was over, the woman looked at Marcus with tired eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stopped tonight." Marcus shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. Anybody would have done the same." But the truth was, Marcus knew that wasn't always the case. Many people might have just driven by, telling themselves it wasn't their problem. He couldn't have done that. He thought of his own daughter, Lily. If she were ever in danger, he would pray someone would stop to help. The woman finally introduced herself. "My name is Elena. And this is my son, Daniel." She placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder as she spoke. Marcus nodded. "I'm Marcus. My daughter's name is Lily. She's asleep now, but you'll meet her in the morning. She'll be happy to have a new friend." Daniel looked up for the first time since arriving. His eyes were wide, curious, but still filled with caution. Marcus gave him a gentle smile, one that he often gave Lily when she was nervous. Slowly, Daniel leaned closer to his mother, but Marcus could tell he was listening. Elena's face was marked with exhaustion. She looked like she hadn't rested properly in days, maybe weeks. Her hands were thin and bruised in places, her clothes torn at the edges. Marcus could only imagine what she had gone through. Still, he didn't push her for details. He knew she needed time. "You and Daniel can stay here tonight," Marcus said firmly. "I don't have much space, but you'll be safe." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Safe, that's all I want for him." Marcus showed them to the small couch where they could sleep. He gave them blankets and a pillow, making sure Daniel was tucked in warmly. Elena sat beside her son, holding his hand until his breathing slowed and he fell into a deep sleep. Only then did she allow herself to close her eyes. Marcus stayed awake a little longer, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He thought about what had happened. He thought about the angry man chasing them, the bruises on Elena's face, the fear in Daniel's eyes. It stirred something deep inside him, a protective instinct he couldn't ignore. He knew he was already struggling to care for Lily, but he couldn't imagine turning Elena and Daniel away. That wasn't who he was. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains. Lily woke up early, as she usually did on weekends. She ran into the living room, her small feet tapping against the floor. When she saw Elena and Daniel on the couch, she stopped, her eyes wide with surprise. Marcus quickly explained. "Sweetheart, this is Elena and her son, Daniel. They needed a safe place last night, so they're staying with us." Lily's natural kindness showed immediately. She smiled at Daniel and said, "Hi, I'm Lily. Do you want to play with me?" Daniel hesitated, looking at his mother first. Elena gave him a gentle nod, and slowly he stood up. Within minutes, the two children were sitting on the floor, playing with Lily's box of crayons and coloring books. The sound of their laughter filled the room, a sound Marcus hadn't heard in a long while. For a moment, it felt as if everything was normal. Elena watched the children, her face softening. She looked at Marcus and whispered, "You have a wonderful daughter. She's so kind." Marcus smiled. "She's the best part of my life." Later that day, Marcus made pancakes for breakfast. It wasn't much, but to the children, it was a treat. They sat together at the small table, and for a brief time, it felt like a family. Marcus couldn't help but notice how Daniel looked at him with cautious admiration, as though he wasn't used to being in a safe home with a man who was gentle and patient. After breakfast, Elena finally shared a little of her story. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but Marcus listened quietly, never interrupting. She explained how she had been trapped in a relationship with a man who controlled every part of her life. He isolated her from her friends and family, leaving her with no one to turn to. He often lost his temper, and she had suffered more times than she could count. But what hurt her the most was seeing Daniel frightened, seeing the little boy grow up in fear. "I couldn't let him grow up like that," she whispered. "I had to run, even if I didn't know where to go." Marcus felt his chest tighten as he listened. He thought of Lily, of how he had promised himself that she would never live in fear. He couldn't imagine what Elena had endured, but he respected her bravery for escaping, even when she had no plan. "You did the right thing," Marcus said gently. "It takes strength to walk away from something like that." Elena looked at him with tired eyes, tears threatening to fall. "Strength? I don't feel strong. I feel broken." Marcus shook his head. "You're stronger than you think. You protected your son. That makes you stronger than anyone." For the next few days, Elena and Daniel stayed with Marcus and Lily. The children grew close quickly, spending hours playing together. Lily shared her toys and even gave Daniel one of her favorite stuffed animals to keep. In the evenings, Marcus read them stories before bed, his voice carrying a warmth that made both children smile. During those moments, Marcus noticed something he hadn't felt in a long time. His home was filled with life, with laughter, with the kind of warmth that had been missing since Lily's mother left. He tried not to think too deeply about it, but he couldn't deny that Elena and Daniel's presence had brought something special into their lives. At the same time, Marcus remained cautious. He knew the man who had chased them might still be looking for Elena. He kept an eye out whenever he went to work or walked to the grocery store. He didn't want to put his daughter at risk, but he also knew he couldn't abandon Elena and Daniel. Elena, meanwhile, tried to help around the house as much as she could. She cooked simple meals, washed dishes, and folded laundry. Marcus noticed how grateful she was for even the smallest kindness. She didn't ask for much, all she wanted was safety for her son. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Marcus and Elena sat at the table. The room was quiet, and the only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall. "I don't know how to thank you," Elena said softly. "You've given us more than just a place to stay. You've given us hope." Marcus looked at her, his expression serious but gentle. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone should do. And as long as you're here, I'll make sure you and Daniel are safe." Elena's eyes shimmered with tears, but this time they were not just from pain, they were from relief. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't alone. Marcus didn't know what the future held, but as he looked at the two children sleeping peacefully in the next room, and at the woman sitting across from him with gratitude in her eyes, he knew he had made the right choice. He had opened his home, and in doing so, he had opened his heart to something new. But deep inside, Marcus also knew this peace might not last. Something told him that the man who had hurt Elena would not give up so easily. Trouble was still out there, waiting. And when it came, Marcus would be ready. The days that followed were filled with both comfort and worry. For Elena and Daniel, Marcus's small apartment became a safe place. The laughter of the children echoed in the rooms, giving the home a new life that Marcus hadn't felt in years. But while there was warmth inside those walls, there was still an invisible shadow outside. Marcus knew the man who had hurt Elena could still be searching for her. That thought never left his mind. One morning, as Marcus was getting ready for work, he found Elena sitting by the window. She looked restless, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea. Her eyes darted toward every sound outside, as if expecting the worst. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Marcus said gently, but he knew his words alone couldn't erase the fear she carried. Elena shook her head. "He won't stop looking. He never does. I know him, he'll keep coming back." Marcus sighed. He had been trying to figure out what the next step should be. He couldn't let them stay hidden forever. They needed help from the authorities. So that afternoon, he made a decision. "Elena," he said firmly, "we need to go to the police. You can't fight this alone. He has to be held accountable for what he's done." At first, Elena resisted. She had no faith left in the system. She worried that reporting him would only make things worse. But Marcus explained patiently that the only way to truly protect Daniel and herself was to make sure the man could no longer harm them. Finally, with tears in her eyes, she agreed. Marcus arranged for his neighbor to watch Lily and Daniel for a few hours, and then he drove Elena to the local police station. The building was small, with faded paint and a flag fluttering at the entrance. Elena's steps were slow as they entered, but Marcus stayed close by her side, his presence giving her the courage she needed. Inside, a female officer welcomed them. She had kind eyes and listened carefully as Elena began to share her story. Her voice shook, but Marcus noticed how the officer leaned forward, showing genuine concern. Elena spoke about years of control, about the threats, and about the night she finally ran away. Every word was heavy with pain, and Marcus's hands clenched into fists as he listened. When she finished, the officer assured her, "You did the right thing. You're safe here. We'll look into this immediately." She asked Elena to describe the man, his habits, and the places he frequented. Marcus stayed quiet, letting Elena speak, but he never moved far from her side. He wanted her to know she wasn't alone. After taking the statement, the officers promised to investigate quickly. Marcus drove Elena back home, and she looked both relieved and exhausted. For the first time, she felt that maybe someone would stand up against the man who had hurt her. 2 days later, the police returned to Marcus's apartment. Elena's heart almost stopped when she saw the patrol car outside, but the officers quickly explained that they were there with news. Marcus invited them inside, and they all sat around the small kitchen table. The lead officer cleared his throat. "We've been investigating the man you described. His name is already known to us." Elena froze, her breath caught in her throat. The officer continued, his voice firm but serious. "He isn't just an abusive partner. He's wanted for multiple crimes in other towns. Assaults, thefts, and even armed robberies. He's been hiding under different names, moving from place to place. You weren't just living with a dangerous man, Elena. You were living with someone the authorities have been trying to capture for years." The room fell into heavy silence. Elena's face turned pale, and her hands shook violently. Marcus reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, steady and reassuring. Daniel, who had been playing quietly in the other room, peeked through the doorway, sensing the tension. Marcus quickly smiled at him, trying to keep him calm, then looked back at the officer. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice steady. The officer explained that they had already started tracking the man's movements. They believed he was hiding nearby, still looking for Elena and Daniel. The police were planning to set up surveillance and hoped to arrest him soon. Elena covered her face with her hands. "I can't believe it. I knew he was dangerous, but I never imagined." Her words trailed off as tears streamed down her cheeks. Marcus spoke firmly, his voice filled with determination. "You don't need to be afraid anymore. You've already done the hardest part. You escaped. Now it's up to them to stop him for good." The officer nodded in agreement. "You and your son are under our protection now. We'll make sure he doesn't hurt you again." After the officers left, the weight of the news lingered in the air. Elena sat quietly on the couch, holding Daniel tightly as though she never wanted to let go. Marcus sat across from them, his mind racing. He thought about how easily things could have gone wrong that night on the road. If he had chosen not to stop, Elena and Daniel might still be trapped in that nightmare. That thought shook him deeply, but it also filled him with a sense of purpose. He wasn't just a bystander in their story anymore. He had become a part of their fight for freedom. Over the next few days, police cars were often seen around the neighborhood. Officers came by regularly to check on Elena and Daniel. Marcus appreciated their presence, but he still remained on alert. Every time he left for work, he scanned the streets carefully. Every night, before going to bed, he double-checked the locks on the doors and windows. Meanwhile, life inside the apartment carried on as best as it could. Lily and Daniel grew closer each day, their laughter blending into the sounds of a home that had once felt so quiet. Elena began to relax a little, though the fear never completely left her eyes. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Marcus and Elena sat together in the dim light of the kitchen. She looked at him, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You didn't even know us, and yet you risked everything that night. You gave us a place to stay. You stood by me when I went to the police. You've done more for us than anyone else ever has." Marcus shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what I hoped someone would do if it were Lily and me in the same situation. No one deserves to live in fear." Elena looked at him for a long moment, her eyes glistening. Maybe fate led us to you." Marcus didn't reply right away, but her words stayed in his heart. He wasn't sure if it was fate, but he knew one thing: he couldn't imagine turning his back on them now. The next morning, the police called again with urgent news. They had tracked the man to an abandoned building on the edge of town. They were preparing to make an arrest. Marcus listened as Elena spoke on the phone, her hands trembling but her voice steady. The officers assured her that she wouldn't have to face him again. For Elena, the nightmare was finally nearing its end. For Marcus, it was a reminder of how quickly life could change. One night, he had been nothing more than a tired single father driving home. Days later, he found himself protecting a woman and her child from a criminal the police had been chasing for years. As Marcus stood by the window that evening, watching the children play together, he felt a quiet strength inside him. He knew the road ahead might not be easy, but he also knew he was no longer walking it alone. Somehow, through fear and struggle, their lives had become intertwined. And together, they would face whatever came next. The morning after the police called with their update, the air inside Marcus's apartment felt different. It was heavy with both relief and fear. Relief that the man who had terrorized Elena and Daniel was finally within reach of the law, but fear that until he was caught, danger still lingered in the shadows. Marcus noticed Elena pacing near the window, her eyes restless, while Daniel clung close to her side. Lily, sensing the unease, tried to cheer Daniel up with her crayons and drawings, but the tension was hard to ignore. That afternoon, the phone rang again. Marcus answered quickly, his heart beating fast. It was the officer who had been handling the case. His voice was calm but firm as he explained that the police had surrounded the building where the man was hiding. There had been a struggle, but they had managed to arrest him without anyone getting hurt. When Marcus relayed the news to Elena, she collapsed into the chair, covering her face with her hands. Tears of relief streamed down her cheeks. Daniel hugged her tightly, not fully understanding everything, but knowing that something important had changed. For the first time in years, Elena whispered, "It's over." Marcus sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You're safe now. Both of you. He can't hurt you anymore." The days that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings with officers, and official statements. The police were grateful for Elena's bravery in coming forward, and they assured her that the man would face serious charges. They also praised Marcus for stepping in that night, saying that his quick action had made all the difference. Marcus didn't care much for praise, what mattered to him was seeing Elena and Daniel free from fear. At home, life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. Lily and Daniel became inseparable. They played together for hours, drawing, building small forts with pillows, and inventing games only they understood. Their laughter filled the apartment in a way Marcus hadn't experienced since before Lily's mother left. He would often pause in the middle of his chores just to listen, letting the sound remind him of why he worked so hard. Elena also began to find her strength again. She cooked meals, shared stories from her past, and even laughed occasionally, though the scars of her pain were still there. Marcus noticed how careful she was with Daniel, how she always made sure he felt safe and loved. He respected her deeply for that. She had been through so much, yet her love for her son never wavered. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Marcus and Elena sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea. The small lamp on the counter cast a warm glow over the room. Elena's eyes looked calmer than before, though still touched by sadness. "I don't know how to start again," she admitted quietly. "Everything I knew before was tied to him. He controlled everything. Now, without him, it feels like I don't even know who I am anymore." Marcus looked at her with steady eyes. "You're stronger than you think, Elena. You took the hardest step, you walked away. That takes courage. The rest, you'll figure it out, one day at a time. And you're not alone anymore." Elena smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Not alone. That's something I haven't felt in years." Their lives began to intertwine more naturally as the days passed. Marcus noticed how Daniel looked up to him, following him around the apartment and asking small questions about tools, work, and even his boots. It reminded Marcus of how much children longed for safety and guidance. He never tried to replace Daniel's father, but he gave him the steady kindness the boy had been missing. Lily, too, blossomed in the company of her new friend. She had always been cheerful, but now she had someone to share her games with, someone who made her laughter even louder. Marcus couldn't help but feel grateful for the way Daniel and Elena had unexpectedly entered their lives. The community began to hear about what had happened. Neighbors who once only nodded politely now came by to shake Marcus's hand, calling him brave. Some even offered to help with groceries or watch the children if needed. Marcus was surprised by the attention, but he realized people respected him not just for his work ethic, but for his heart. One Saturday afternoon, the four of them went to the park together. The children ran ahead, chasing each other across the grass while Marcus and Elena sat on a bench, watching them. The sunlight warmed their faces, and for a while, it felt like the past didn't exist, only the present moment of peace. Elena turned to Marcus and said softly, "I never imagined I could feel normal again. But sitting here, watching them laugh, it feels like a new beginning." Marcus nodded. "That's exactly what it is. A new beginning. For all of us." In the weeks that followed, Elena began searching for work. She wanted to rebuild her life, to provide for Daniel and prove to herself that she could stand on her own. Marcus encouraged her every step of the way, sometimes watching Daniel and Lily when she went to interviews. Slowly, her confidence grew. Marcus, too, felt changes within himself. For years, his life had been centered around survival, working hard, paying bills, raising Lily alone. But now, he realized he had become part of something bigger. His small family had unexpectedly grown, and his heart had opened in ways he hadn't thought possible. One night, after the children had fallen asleep, Marcus found himself standing by the window, looking out at the quiet street. Elena joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. They stood in silence for a while, then Elena said, "I used to believe good people didn't exist anymore. That the world was only full of pain and cruelty. But then you stopped that night. You changed everything. Marcus shook his head gently. I didn't change everything. You did that when you ran. You chose freedom. I just happened to be there when you needed a hand. But Elena disagreed. She looked at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. No, Marcus. You didn't just give us shelter. You gave us hope. You gave Daniel a chance to see what kindness looks like. That means everything. The words touched Marcus deeply. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that in that moment, he was exactly where he was meant to be. Months later, life had truly transformed. Elena found a part-time job at a bakery, and Daniel adjusted to a new school. He walked to class each morning holding Lily's hand, the two of them giggling about secrets only children understood. Marcus continued his long hours at work, but he no longer came home to an empty apartment. Instead, he came home to laughter, to shared meals, to warmth that filled every corner. The past still lingered in Elena's eyes sometimes, especially when shadows reminded her of old fears. But each day she grew stronger, and each day Marcus reminded her through simple acts of kindness, through his steady presence, that she and Daniel were no longer alone. What began as a single night of danger had grown into a story of healing, courage, and second chances. Marcus, once a struggling single dad fighting to make ends meet, had discovered that even in his hardest days, he had the power to change someone else's life. And in return, his own life had been changed in ways he never imagined. The world still had its challenges, but together, they faced them with hope. Marcus looked at Lily and Daniel, their laughter filling the air, and at Elena, her eyes brighter than they had been before, and he realized something he hadn't felt in years.